The past is a chrome mirror that eventually reflects the truth you've been trying to hide from the world. Experience the sharp edge of a final reckoning, where every choice is weighed and every debt is paid in full. Click subscribe now and witness the ultimate moment of truth.
The morning my son-in-law told me what he was going to do with my land, I was standing at the kitchen window watching a pair of cardinals fight over the feeder I'd hung from the old oak out back. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, the red of the male against the gray November sky, and how my wife Eleanor would have loved it. She always kept a list in a little spiral notebook every bird she spotted on the property, the date, the weather, sometimes a small sketch in the margin. I still have that notebook in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't answer my son-in-law right away. I let him talk. He was good at talking. My name is Gerald Holt. I'm 67 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. And when I retired 4 years ago, I took the inheritance my father left me, a modest sum and 11 acres of land in central Tennessee, and I built something I'd been drawing in my head since I was 40 years old. A proper home workshop. A barn I converted into the cleanest, most organized woodworking space you've ever seen. A small pond I dug out and stocked with largemouth bass. A garden that Eleanor and I planted together in the spring of what turned out to be her last healthy year. She passed 18 months after we moved in. Cancer. Fast and merciless, the way it sometimes goes. I stayed. People asked me if I'd sell, move closer to town, be near family. I told them no. This land was the last project Eleanor and I did together. Every fence post, every garden bed, every stone path from the back door to the workshop, she had a hand in it. I wasn't going anywhere. My daughter, Melissa, understood that. Or at least I thought she did. Her husband, my son-in-law, did not. His name is Derek, and I want to be fair to him because fairness is something my father taught me to hold on to, even when it's hard. Derek is not a bad man in the way that some men are bad. He doesn't drink. He doesn't run around. He works hard and he loves my daughter, I believe that. But he has a particular quality that I've seen in certain men throughout my life. A quality that looks like confidence from the outside but is really something closer to entitlement. He assumes the world will arrange itself around what he wants. And up until the November I'm talking about, the world mostly had. He called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was sanding the face frame for a cabinet I was building. I turned off the orbital sander and answered because it was my daughter's house number, and I always answer for Melissa. "Gerald," he said. "Not Dad, never Dad. Always Gerald. I need to run something by you." I told him to go ahead. Cheryl and Ron are moving down from Ohio. Those were his parents. The cold up there is getting to them, and Ron's hip isn't great. They need to be somewhere warmer. I said that made sense, and I was sorry to hear about Ron's hip. "We've been thinking," he said, and I noticed the careful placement of my daughter inside his plan, that the guest house on your property would be perfect for them, just temporary, until we find them something permanent. I stood in my workshop for a moment with the phone against my ear and the smell of sawdust in the air, and I didn't say anything. "Gerald, I heard you," I said. "It's just sitting there empty," he said. "It's a waste, really. 2 bedrooms. A full bath. Cheryl and Ron would keep to themselves. You wouldn't even know they were there. The guest house was not just sitting there empty. I used it for storage of lumber and project materials. More than that, it was the house my father had lived in when he was too old to manage the main property alone. I had repainted it the same color it was when he was alive. I kept his rocking chair on the front porch. I was not sentimental about many things, but I was sentimental about that. I told Derek I'd think about it. "Don't think too long," he said, with a small laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. "We're looking at end of January. Cheryl's already excited." I hung up and stood there in the quiet of my workshop for a long time. Then I called my friend Walt, who had been my attorney for 20 years, and was also the man who taught me to fish, and I told him what Derek had said. Walt listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I valued about him. "You want to tell him no?" he asked. "I want to tell him more than no," I said. "But I want to do it right. Walt was quiet for a moment. "Come by the office Thursday," he said. "Bring all your property documents. I think we should talk about a few things." I went on Thursday. I brought the documents. What Walt explained to me over the next 2 hours would turn out to be the most useful conversation I'd had since Eleanor died. I want to be clear about something before I go further. What I decided to do was not about revenge. I've thought about that word a lot since everything happened, and it doesn't fit right. Revenge is about making someone else feel pain to balance out your own. What I did was different. It was about protection. It was about looking at the trajectory of things the way Derek spoke to me. The way he'd slowly repositioned himself in Melissa's decisions over their 8 years of marriage. The way he sometimes talked about my land in terms of square footage and market value when he didn't know I was listening, and understanding that if I didn't act now, clearly and permanently, this property would not survive me. That sounds dramatic. But I had watched my father lose control of a small business he built because he never put proper structures around it. I had watched a neighbor's family farm get subdivided and sold off in pieces within 2 years of the old man's death. I understood what happened to things you loved when you didn't plan carefully. Eleanor used to say, I was a worrier. I preferred to call it preparation. The plan Walt and I put together was quiet and entirely legal and completely airtight. I won't bore you with all of it, but the core of it was this. I established an irrevocable conservation easement on the 11 acres through a land trust organization based in Nashville. The easement meant that the land could never be subdivided, developed commercially, or used for purposes outside of residential and agricultural use by the designated property owner. The guest house, under the terms of the easement, could only be occupied by a direct family member of the primary landowner, meaning me, or a blood relative, or someone I designated in writing. Not in-laws, not parents of in-laws, not Derek's mother and father, no matter how bad Ron's hip was. I also updated my estate documents so that the property would pass, upon my death, not directly to Melissa in a way Derek could influence, but into a family trust administered jointly by Melissa and my younger sister, Patricia, with a set of conditions that preserved the land's character and use for a minimum of 25 years. I signed the easement paperwork on a Friday morning in December. Walt notarized it. We shook hands over coffee and Walt said, "You know this is going to be a conversation." "I know," I said. "You want me there when you have it?" "No," I said. "I'll handle it myself." I drove home, walked out to the pond, and sat on the dock for an hour watching the water. A great blue heron landed on the far bank and stood there motionless. For so long, I thought it might be a decoy. Then it stabbed its beak into the water and came up with a small fish and swallowed it whole and flew away without a sound. I thought about Eleanor and her little notebook, and I felt, for the first time, in a long time, genuinely at peace. January came. Derek called twice. I was polite both times and told him we'd sort everything out when they came for their planned visit the last weekend of the month. He seemed satisfied with that. I could hear it in his voice. The assumption that I was simply working up the courage to say yes. My daughter called the night before they arrived. She sounded careful, the way she sounded when she was trying to manage 2 conversations at once. The one she was having with me and the one she was already having with Derek in her head. "Dad, I just want to make sure you've thought this through," she said. "Cheryl and Ron really do need somewhere to land. And it's only temporary." "Nothing is only temporary," I said. Not unkindly. "But come tomorrow and we'll talk." She was quiet. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" "I'm going to be completely honest with you," I said. "That's the easiest thing I know how to do." They arrived Saturday morning, Derek and Melissa in their SUV. And about 40 minutes later, a rented cargo van pulled up behind them. Cheryl and Ron got out with 3 of their adult grandchildren, who had apparently come to help with the move. The grandchildren started unloading boxes before anyone had said hello to me. I came off the porch and told them politely, but firmly, to stop. Derek looked at me with an expression that reminded me of a man who expects a door to open automatically and walks straight into it instead. "What's the issue, Gerald?" "No issue," I said. I just think we should talk before anyone starts moving anything. We've talked, he said. It's all figured out. It isn't actually, I said. Why don't we go inside? We went inside. Melissa sat at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a coffee mug. Derek stood. Cheryl and Ron sat on the couch in the living room, and I could see Cheryl craning her neck to look at the guest house through the side window. I set a folder on the table. Inside was a copy of the conservation easement and a one-page summary Walt had prepared in plain English. I want to walk you through something, I said. Derek picked up the summary. He read about 4 lines. His expression changed. What is this? A conservation easement, I said. I placed it on the property in December. You what? He set the paper down. Why? Because this land belonged to my father, and his father before him. Because my wife and I built something here that I intend to protect. And because, Derek, the way you called me and told me that your parents were moving in not asked. Told made me realize I needed to be clearer about how this property works. Derek opened his mouth. I held up one hand, not aggressively, just steadily, and he stopped. Let me finish, I said. The easement means this land can't be developed or subdivided. The guest house can only be occupied by my direct family. I've also updated my estate plan so that if something happens to me, there are protections in place for how this property is managed. I looked at my daughter. Melissa, you're part of that. You and your Aunt Patricia will have equal roles. I want you to know that. Melissa's eyes were wet. She wasn't crying yet, but she was close. She was looking at the folder on the table, and I could see her working through something. Derek was not working through anything quietly. You're telling me, he said, his voice rising in a way that made Cheryl shift on the couch, that you did all of this in secret, without talking to your own daughter, to block my parents from having a place to live? I'm telling you, I said calmly, that I protected my own property, which is my right. It's going to be Melissa's property someday. Yes, I said. And the trust ensures that when it is, it stays what it's always been. I'd call that a gift. I'd call it control from the grave, Derek said. I looked at him for a long moment. I wasn't angry. I want you to understand that. What I felt was something steadier than anger. Derek, I said, you called me on a Tuesday and told me your parents were arriving at the end of January. You didn't ask. You didn't invite conversation. You assumed I would accommodate you because it was convenient for you. I paused. I don't hold that against you as a person, but I won't be managed. Not on this land. Not in this house. He stared at me. Then he picked up the folder and walked out the front door. I heard him talking on the phone in the driveway. Sharp, clipped sentences. Cheryl and Ron were very quiet on the couch. Ron looked genuinely embarrassed, and I felt a moment of sympathy for him. He was a decent man who had let his son speak for him one too many times. I'm sorry, Ron said quietly. You have nothing to apologize for, I told him, and I meant it. Melissa was still at the table. She hadn't moved. I sat down across from her and waited. Why didn't you tell me? She finally said. Because I needed to do it first, I said. If I'd told you before it was done, Derek would have made it a negotiation. And this wasn't a negotiation. That's not fair to me, Dad. No, I said. It isn't. And I'm sorry for that part. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. He's going to be furious for a long time. Probably. This is going to cause problems. It might, I said. Or it might draw a line that should have been drawn years ago. Either way, I'm here. This place is here. And that's not changing. She looked out the window at the garden, brown and dormant in January, but still neatly laid out. The stone path still visible, the raised beds Eleanor had insisted on because she said her knees weren't what they used to be. Mom would have done the same thing, Melissa said softly. Your mother would have been quicker about it, I said. She laughed. Just a small laugh, but it was real. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Outside, I could hear Derek still on the phone. The grandchildren were sitting on the tailgate of the cargo van, clearly uncertain what to do. Cheryl had come to the window and was looking at the guest house with an expression that had shifted from excited to something more complicated. The plan she and Derek had made was real estate now, just numbers and square footage, not a home, because it was never supposed to be their home. It was someone else's. There is something I've learned about people like Derek, people who operate on assumption and forward momentum. They struggle most when they encounter something that was finished before they arrived. They're good at pushing against things in progress, negotiations, discussions, people still making up their minds. They don't know what to do with a decision that's already made, filed, notarized, and attached permanently to a piece of land. Derek came back inside about 20 minutes later. He sat down. He had composed himself, which I respected. "What happens to my parents?" he asked. "That's something I hope you'll figure out," I said. "There are good communities in this area. Senior living apartments in Nashville. Some very nice ones. I'm happy to share some information Walt put together." I slid a second sheet from the folder. "There are also 2 houses for rent in the county within 15 miles that are single-story and would suit them." He looked at the sheet. He didn't say anything. "I'm not your parents' enemy," I said. "I'm simply not in a position to be their landlord. That's not what this place is." He nodded once, very slightly. It wasn't agreement exactly. It was more like the moment when a man realizes the conversation he planned to have is not the one that's actually happening. They left that afternoon. The cargo van left with all the boxes still in it. Ron shook my hand before he got in the van and held it for a moment longer than necessary. I didn't say anything, and neither did he. But there was an understanding between us that skipped over everything Derek had said and landed somewhere simpler and more honest. Melissa hugged me at my truck for a long time. "Call me this week," I said. "I will, Dad. I mean it. Not because of all this. Just because." She pulled back and looked at me. She had Eleanor's eyes, always had. "I know," she said. I watched them drive out down the gravel lane, and I stood there until the sound of the engine faded, and there was nothing left but the wind in the tree line, and somewhere behind me the shop door I hadn't latched properly banging, softly against its frame. I went back to my workshop. The cabinet face frame was right where I'd left it. I picked up the sander and finished what I'd started. In the months that followed, Derek was distant. That was his right. Melissa and I talked every week, sometimes twice. She told me, in the careful way she had of delivering difficult information, that Derek had taken the situation personally, that he felt I'd gone around him, that he'd said some things about the property and about me that she hadn't agreed with. I told her I wasn't asking her to take sides. She said she knew that, and then she said something that I've thought about many times since. "The thing is, Dad, I didn't even know how I felt about his parents moving there until it was already decided. And now that I've had time to think about it, I think I would have said no. I just never got the chance. I didn't say anything to that. I just listened. He makes a lot of decisions before I have a chance to think," she said quietly. "That's been going on for a while. That conversation led to others. Some of those others led to a period of real difficulty in her marriage that I won't detail here because it isn't mine to tell. What I will say is that by the following spring, Melissa was seeing a counselor. And she told me that one of the things she'd worked through was a pattern she'd fallen into of deferring to Derek in ways that had slowly, over years, become invisible to her. She thanked me for the conversation in the kitchen that January. I told her I hadn't done it for her. Not exactly. That I'd done it for the land, for Eleanor, for my father. But that I was glad it had mattered to her in some other way I hadn't planned. That summer, Melissa came out for 2 weekends in a row. The second time she brought her daughter, my granddaughter Lily, who was 8 years old and had her great-grandmother's habit of going very still when she was looking at something beautiful. We walked the whole 11 acres together, the 3 of us, and I showed Lily the pond, and the garden, and the workshop, and I let her sand a small piece of scrap pine, and she decided immediately that woodworking was going to be her life's work, the way 8-year-olds do. I showed her Eleanor's bird notebook. She held it with 2 hands the way children hold things they understand are important, and she pointed at one of the small sketches, a cedar waxwing, and asked who drew it. "Your great-grandmother," I said. She looked at it for a long time. "Can I add to it?" she asked. I thought about that for a moment. About Eleanor and her careful handwriting and the dates and weather notes in the margins, and how I had kept that notebook in my drawer for 3 years like something too fragile to touch. "Yes," I said. "I think that's exactly right." We spent the rest of that afternoon on the back porch, Lily with the notebook in her lap and a pencil from the kitchen junk drawer, trying to draw a mockingbird that was giving us a full concert from the oak tree. She got the shape mostly wrong and the proportions were off, and she wrote the date in large, uneven numbers at the bottom. It was the best entry in the whole book. I've been asked since then by a couple of people who know the story, whether I regret how I handled things, whether I should have talked to Derek first, or warned Melissa, or found a softer way. I've thought about it honestly. My answer is no. Not because I was right in every moment, I wasn't. I know I could have brought Melissa in sooner, and I should have. But because the alternative wasn't a conversation, Derek doesn't do conversations. He does outcomes. He would have found a way to slow-walk my objections, involve my daughter's emotions, make me feel like the difficult one, the unreasonable one, the old man who didn't understand how the world worked. I'd watched him do it to Melissa for years without recognizing it. Sometimes, you have to let the document do the talking. My father used to say that the most powerful thing a man can build is something that outlasts him. He meant it about legacy, about character, about how you raise your children. I think he was right about all of that. But he was also practically right, in a way I don't think he fully intended. The land is protected now. The easement is filed with the county and the land trust. The trust documents are in Walt's safe and in a fireproof box under my workbench. When I'm gone, Melissa and Patricia will carry it forward. And Lily will add pages to her great-grandmother's bird notebook. Season after season, whatever birds choose to land here, whatever she sees fit to draw. The heron came back this spring. Same spot on the far bank, or at least I assume it's the same one. They're territorial. They return to what they've claimed. I understand that about them. I sat on the dock on a Thursday morning in April with a cup of coffee and watched it stand there in the shallows, still as a statue, patient in a way that only makes sense if you've ever built something slowly and waited a long time to see it finished. The cardinal was back too. The male, still fighting with whatever cardinals fight with in the morning. The oak had budded out. The garden was turned and planted, green shoots coming up in Eleanor's raised beds. The workshop smelled the way a good workshop should. This was what I worked for. This was what the paperwork protected. Not just the acres or the structures or the market value. None of that. The silence. The particular quality of a morning on land that belongs to you completely, that no one can subdivide or claim or rearrange to suit themselves. The feeling of a place that will be here tomorrow and the year after, and the year after that, changed by seasons and time but not by ambition or convenience or a son-in-law's phone call on a Tuesday afternoon. I finished my coffee. I rinsed the cup at the outdoor spigot. I unlocked the workshop, turned on the lights, and stood for a moment in the familiar smell of sawdust and linseed oil and finished wood. Then I got back to work.